Good evening, everyone. We're just going to give it a minute for folks to come in from the waiting room. Okay, good evening and welcome to day 2 of Defund to Abolish. Before we get started, we'd like to make sure everyone has what they need to access this event, so thank you for your patience. Bienvenidos a Desfinanciar para Abolir. Si desea escuchar este evento en español, haga clic en el botón en la parte inferior de la pantalla que dice Interpretación y seleccione Español. También recomendamos que haga clic en Silenciar audio original o Mute Original Audio para que solo escuche la interpretación en español y no el audio original en inglés. Si no ve el botón Interpretación, haga clic en el botón que dice More o Más. La interpretación debería ser una de las opciones ahí. Si tiene problema para conectarse al canal en español, háganoslo saber enviando una pregunta haciendo clic en el botón Q y A, donde están las burbujas de conversación en la parte inferior de su pantalla. If you would like to use the closed captioning feature, please click on the button at the bottom of your screen that says Live Transcript, or CC, and you should begin seeing the captions at the bottom of the screen. In addition, everyone should be able to see the American Sign Language interpreter currently and throughout the event. If you have trouble accessing closed captioning or any trouble seeing the ASL interpreter, please let us know by clicking on the Q&A button and writing us a question. If you have any other issues accessing the event, please let us know through the Q&A feature or by emailing us at defundtoabolishcolloquium2021@gmail.com, and we will do our best to assist you. This information is also available in the chat box.
Good evening. My name is Sonali Sepp, and I am the editor-in-chief of the NYU Review of Law and Social Change. I'm here with Aisha Kraus-Lee, Claire Lowinger-Iverson, and Lauren Wilfong, the journal's Colloquia editors. Welcome to day 2 of Defund to Abolish, a 2-part colloquium bringing together more than 20 organizers, legal practitioners, and activist scholars to explore ways to defund and abolish the police, shift the power to marginalized communities, and actualize a police-free future. Each year, the NYU Review of Law and Social Change, an academic journal founded during the Civil Rights Movement to support scholarship for social justice, hosts a colloquium on a complex and timely social justice topic with the goal of centering conversations that have otherwise been on the fringes of legal academia. We cannot think of a more urgent or relevant topic, one that implicates so many intersections of oppression and resistance, but most especially our history and present of white supremacy and anti-Black racism, than the movement to defund and abolish the police. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to Aisha, Claire, and Lauren, Social Change's colloquium organizers, as well as the many staff editors who have worked tirelessly over the past 6 months to put this colloquium together. This event would not be possible without our partners, NYU Black Allied Law Students Association and Latinx Law Students Association, as well as the generous support of the Student Bar Association and more than 40 co-sponsoring student groups, a complete list of which you can find in your program and on our website. This evening, we will hear from 2 amazing panels, each running approximately 70 minutes. You can find additional information on each panelist in your brochure and on our website. Each panel will leave time for questions at the end, and you can send questions throughout the panel by clicking the Q+A icon at the bottom of your screen or by emailing defundtoabolishcolloquium2021@gmail.com. If you are an attorney seeking continuing legal education credits in New York State, you must have registered with us in advance of the event and logged into Zoom with the same email address you provided to us prior to joining this event. We will periodically announce and display for approximately 30 seconds CLE codes that you must write down and provide to us after the event in order to receive credit for attending. Each code will be read twice. With that, we will turn things over to our day 2 opening panel, Communities Without Police. We keep our communities safe, to hear from practitioners creating abolitionist care and safety systems in their communities. The panel is moderated by Zach Norris, Executive Director of the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, an organization that works locally, statewide, and nationally to shift resources away from prisons and punishment and toward opportunities that make communities safe, healthy, and strong. He is also co-founder of Restore Oakland, a community advocacy and training center in the Bay Area, as well as Justice for Families, a national alliance of family-driven organizations working to end our nation's youth incarceration epidemic. Zach is the author of Defund Fear, Safety Without Policing, Prisons, and Punishment. You can read Zach's full bio on our website. Take it away, Zach.
Thanks, Sonali. Really appreciate it. Appreciate you all for being here. Want to also extend my thanks to the NYU School of Law community as alum. As has been said, my name is Zach Norris. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the executive director at the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights. And I am super honored and super excited to get to introduce our amazing panelists. I'm going to start with Lilac Maldonado, who's a community organizer and culture worker who identifies as a sick and disabled neurodivergent two-spirit Chicanx femme. She has been actively organizing since 2009 around many intersectional social justice issues such as racial justice, gender justice, disability justice, LGBTQIA+ issues, and body autonomy and acceptance. They are an avid Zeinster who has written and created artwork for various academic and social justice DIY booklets. She is a co-founding member of and logistics coordinator for the Los Angeles Spoonie Collective, a grassroots disability justice group connecting disabled activists and artists to community organizing and education opportunities. They are also part of the education team at the Fireweed Collective. And I'm remembering to slow down. Kirby Joseph is a first generation Haitian woman from Brooklyn, New York, and a community organizer with the Answer Act Now to Stop War and End Racism Coalition. Kirby has been organizing since the age of 19 in New York City, uplifting struggles against police brutality, mass incarceration, and for housing and LGBTQ STGNC struggles. Kirby has organized and led the Stop the Cops Unity March from the Bronx to Harlem in solidarity for Trayvon Martin, Ramarley Graham, and all police brutality victims. Kirby is a lead organizer in the Justice for Akai Gurley family campaign and works with many of the police brutality families in New York City. And I am, in the interest of time, gonna keep moving along our introductions. I wanna also introduce Kelly Savage Rodriguez, who is the new the LWOP coordinator for California Coalition for Women Prisoners and an organizer with Survived and Punished. Kelly was recently released from prison at 46 years old after having been incarcerated for 23 years. Governor Brown commuted her life without parole sentence in December of 2017, and she was finally released on parole in November of 2018. As a domestic violence survivor, Kelly was forced to experience the similarities between domestic violence and the violence of incarceration. And she was an inside member of CCWP, California Coalition for Women Prisoners, for 15 years and helped initiate their Organizing to End Life Without Parole campaign. And last but not least, Daniel Sered envisioned and directs Common Justice, which develops and advances practical and groundbreaking solutions to violence that advance racial equity, meet the needs of those most harmed, and do not rely on incarceration. Before planning the launch of Common Justice, Daniel served as the deputy director of the Vera Institute of Justice's Adolescent Reentry Initiative, a program for young men returning from incarceration on Rikers Island. She is also the author of The Other Side of Harm, addressing disparities in our response to violence and of accounting for violence, how to increase safety and break our failed reliance on mass incarceration, and the book Until We Reckon, Violence, Mass Incarceration, and a Road to Repair. So I am just really honored and grateful to be able to moderate this panel. I like to think it has something to do with the fact that I'm a graduate of NYU and also a former BALSA member, but really just excited to be talking with you all. And I want to start off with a question for all of our panelists. And whoever feels so moved to jump in first, please do so. I can't yet see you all, but I'm sure that I will. The first question is, many people believe defund the police and community safety are incompatible, that this idea of defunding the police and building community safety are incompatible. What are your thoughts, and what is your experience as an organizer, as well as a person, tell you about this? Please just go ahead and jump in. I can now see you, Lila.
Hi, everyone. So a little bit of background about me is I've studied history, American history to be specific, the history of marginalized peoples in the United States, and a lot of racial justice organizing stuff, ranging the length of our nation's history. And from this, I've learned that policing and community safety are incompatible because policing was never designed to keep communities safe at all, but rather to protect property, especially here in the US. So policing in southern slaveholding states had its roots in slave patrol squadrons, which were made up of like vigilantes, of white volunteers who enforced slave laws and crushed uprising, punished those who were believed to be sowing seeds of dissent or violating any kind of plantation rules. And they could forcefully enter anyone's home who they believe were hiding. They were suspicious of sheltering people who are escaping bondage. And this actually mirrors some of the things that we see still now being done by police. I have a friend who survived the Watts riots in 1965 here in Los Angeles, a Black trans woman, and she told me years ago and in conversation that when the Watts riots had finished, that white police came into her neighborhood and they took everything from your home that you did not have a receipt for. It doesn't matter what it was. They would take usually electronics and things like that. Like they would take like your blender and your TV, because 1965, these are things that are of value, furniture, things that they want. And these things were then collected and anybody who could say that they had things stolen from them can then go and take, usually white folks in the community can go and take these things without having to furnish any kind of proof. But the more commonly known precursors of the modern law enforcement were actually centralized municipal police departments that began popping up on the East Coast in big cities like Boston and New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Albany, those kinds of places. And the first police forces were overwhelmingly white and male and more focused on responding to disorder than crime. So they were actually, police were paid. Oftentimes they were sent to control dangerous underclass that included Blacks, immigrants, and the poor. And throughout the 20th century, there were like few standards for hiring or training officers. And this occurs at the same time as urbanization, industrialization, which caused labor unrest, things like the Hayward Market riots, where people were hung before they were exonerated, and some people who were because of anti-immigrant, anti-labor union sentiments. And this also followed mass immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. You see a lot of xenophobia, anti-collectivism, things like Seiko and Vanzetti, where you have people accused without fair trial. And so, and at the same time, you have things like the Great Migration, where you have anti-Black racism in sundown towns and increases of lynching. The KKK actually started in the late 1800s in response to Blacks moving into the Midwest, and then you have a government corruption and having a big business in government's pocket. And you have things like Tammany Hall, Boss Tweed, the uprising of monopolies, and this all mirrors the US imperialism abroad, where lands are taken in the Mexican-American Wars, the Spanish-American Wars, and the United States becomes a colonial superpower, where lands and peoples are stolen. And you just see this throughout, like you see this police, I guess like police presence happening so much that it kind of like begs the question, like, when are we going to be tired of police? Like, when are we've been doing this for since the 1700s, and it's I think it really the moment is asking for us to consider something new and something that hasn't worked before. It's not going to keep working if we reinvent it or try to reconnoiter it in some kind of way. We need to abolish a broken system and bring forth systems of community accountability, community safety. Communities keep each other safe, and there's been a lot of research around that, and I'm glad to talk about that more today.
Right on. Thank you so much, Lilac, for that like broad and sweeping history, and yet concise in terms of the multiple layers of oppression, and that and really flipping the question on its head to really examine the compatibility of policing with community safety. So I really appreciate that. Kirby and Danielle, you all have been doing this work in New York in particular. And I'm wondering if either of you would like to speak to this question.
I can go, Comrade, unless you want to go.
Cool. Kirby, go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Okay. So it wasn't mentioned before, but I am also the Safe Outside the System coordinator at the Audre Lorde Project, and so I follow in the tradition of Jairus Dixon and Che Johnson, who do a lot of transformative justice community safety work. And something that, was just touched on is the reality of, if we are talking about community safety, we actually have to talk about police violence and police brutality. You can't avoid it. You can't avoid talking about how police officers occupy our neighborhoods, how they cause harm to our communities, how they get to practice violence based on their biases, and how it comes from a white supremacist lens. And when you say that, we then have to look within ourselves and talk about community safety. But community safety is something that always existed. People have always been keeping each other safe. Things like having your friend text you when they get home. Things like feeding your community. There are people here on this call who can talk about their mother, their grandmother, their aunt who fed people. That's all part of community safety, that little remote thing. And so what we're seeing is this huge upsurge of the term abolition, right? And we know the OGs who wrote about it, who theorized about it, who taught about it. But in order to talk about abolition, you have to acknowledge that capitalism, which is functioning how it's always functioned, is not broken. It's working just how it's created to work, right? You have to acknowledge that it has to be gone. That's the first step of abolition, that capitalism must exit. And then what does it look like for people to come together? What does collectivism mean? What does it mean to protect each other? And so now what we're seeing is the emergence of the idea of transforming justice, that people have the capability to not only protect each other and keep our community safe, but create networks where we can literally keep our community safe. What does it look like if a parent knows that they can trust a teacher or the store owner or the church leader or their neighbor to take care of their family members or look out for a community as a whole? What does it mean if a community member knows how to de-escalate, right? Which is the work that we do at the Audre Lorde Project, which is the work that I know happens in Oakland and all over for whoever's here. I see it's like over 200 people here on this chat. So, but what does it mean to create a network where we are literally looking out for each other on the basis of being collective, on the basis of not being individualistic? When we're kids, we are taught the status quo of the system, right? When you are in trouble, you do what? Call 911, you call in the state. Police officers are agents of the state. When we talk about the state, we're talking about the education systems, we're talking about jails, we're talking about courts, we're talking about ICE, right? We're talking about police officers, we're talking about the military, things that keep our system working and functioning with the same belief that it's always functioned with. And so community safety actually goes against that fundamentally, right? And it says that we actually can look out for each other and take care of each other. There's groups like Cooperation Jackson that kind of shows a little roadmap of what that could possibly look like by literally teaching a full community block from corner to corner how to be de-escalated and create resources for itself. Within the Audre Lorde Project, even within the pandemic, I have already taught 20 to 30 households how to be trained in de-escalation, in verbal and physical de-escalation, so to not call the police. In New York City right now, the 3 number 1 police calls that police are responding to are intimate partner violence, which our comrade mentioned earlier, domestic violence, interpersonal violence, as if me and Zach get into an argument, we're not gonna get into an argument, but just saying, and emotional mental distress, right? Those are the calls that police officers are responding to. But the problem is that when they respond, they have their guns drawn, their tasers on full blast, and their batons ready, and ready to call for backup to further traumatize, maim, or kill our community members. They have no training, none at all, in any intimate partner violence. In fact, they don't have to have any training. They don't have to know any laws like VAWA. That's a whole nother thing. We can talk about that another time. They don't have to care about your pronouns. They don't have to care about your community safety. They can function in the way of violence that they always have. And so when we talk about community safety, is making room to completely remove the idea of violence and police interruption, right? And focus in on community integration.
Thank you for that, Kirby. And thank you for your patience with me and not naming your incredible work at the Audre Lorde Project. Thank you for also just bringing in that amazing de-escalation work that you're doing, because that's so critical. And as you talked about, we are keeping our community safe. Danielle, do you want to just add some perspective in terms of what you're seeing also? Pass it to you.
Sure, I'll talk briefly, and really this is like a slightly long version of a way of saying amen to both of those things. So massive thanks for this really powerful start to this conversation. And I think it's really important that we understand, like, first of all, that the resources that are tied up in policing are collective resources. They are taxation, they are each of our money. And we do need those resources so that the people doing the kind of work Kirby described, so that some of them can be compensated for that labor. So that there is the labor of relationship that is just all of ours to do, but there is additional labor people put in to producing safety in their own neighborhoods, and people deserve to be compensated for that labor. And those resources are tied up. Those resources are the same ones we need for things like schools and hospitals and access to food and all of those things that produce safety. And so we cannot unless we are willing to massively tax the rich to dramatically increase the pool of money that we have, we cannot resource the things that actually produce safety if we give all of those resources to policing. But more than that, and this is really where it's just an entire amen, it's that policing and safety are not just they are incompatible with each other, because policing itself produces violence. There's all the acts of violence that that you spoke about, Lilac and Kirby, so clearly, and that I'm not going to repeat. But there's also the intrusion of policing into the very things that produce safety. So policing inscripts racial inequity by force when inequity itself is a driver of violence. It responds to harm with separation when safety is produced in connection. It inflicts violence that exacerbates long-standing cycles of individual and collective pain and trauma when healing is fundamentally prevention work. And it drives economic and social disenfranchisement through collateral consequences and everything else when the ability to meet one's basic needs and contribute to one's community are key protective factors against violence. And so, like, to Kirby's point, safety work is happening in community and always has been. Communities of color would not still be here in America if that were not true. After centuries of structural and interpersonal white violence, were there not extraordinary safety and accountability and healing strategies, like, no one would still be here. And so the question shouldn't be like, why is there violence in these communities? The question should be like, why isn't there more? Like, how do we look for an explanation of how any community can persist, not just to survive, but to thrive, to create, to love one another, to envision in a context of such ongoing, systemic, sustained violence? And those answers are not just things we get to like lift up and say, wow, aren't people so resilient? Like, it is our job to look for the structural forces that interfere with those things, that interrupt the things that produce safety, and to get those structural forces out of the way so that those things that are productive of safety can thrive, so they can take center stage in terms of who has legitimacy to define what safety looks like and how it will be achieved, and to honor the successful interventions that exist by removing the intrusion of policing into their efficacy. And while I know that the things that you listed, Kirby, are the reasons that the calls police respond to, and they like to talk about that a lot, it's also important to note that most police departments spend less than 4% of their time addressing violence. Clearance rates for homicide, like the portion of homicides that actually result in a case going to court, in some jurisdictions are as low as 10%. I mean, most people in my family, in my loved ones, spend more than 4% of their time producing safety, especially if we understand safety in the ways that were just described to us, in the way Kirby is inviting us to understand safety. And so for many people, people in community are doing a greater portion, even as they have day jobs, even as this is none of what they're supposed to be paid for. They do more labor to produce safety than the collective work of policing. So it's also really, and this links to Lilac's point of policing being mostly about the exertion of control over Black and brown bodies in America, not actually about the production of safety. And that's evident in the work that gets done by police departments, which is actually only a small fraction of it in any way about addressing violence. And so if we can redistribute the vast resources, a tiny portion of which go to some destructive form of addressing violence, and drive them to the things that actually work, the possibility for living in a society where we do not hurt one another is entirely within our reach.
Powerful. Thank you so much, Danielle. Kelly, I want to bring it to you, and I want to offer you an opportunity to respond to this first question. But I also want to bring in the second question, and you can respond to both of them or choose which one, and then this question will be open to other panelists as well. And it's related to what many of you were saying, is that, you know, post-COVID, or within the context of COVID, we are seeing an increase in gender-based violence. And in some cities here in Oakland, where I am, an increase in violence in the streets. And I'm wondering if you could talk, Kelly, about the cycle of poverty and violence and poverty, violence, and incarceration that you see, and just talk about your work and how you see these issues.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so very much. I think it's important to have the conversation about not just incarceration, but how people get there and why it is important to look at how individuals who enter the system, 9 out of 10, they're entering the system in a way that produces even more violence in the system. So if I am someone who can't afford basic representation, and I am forced into a system where I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe I don't have, a high school education. So I don't even know how, to communicate with administrators, with that police officer that's responding to a call, maybe medical staff when I'm, being asked questions. Then, I'm more than likely to be steamrolled into a situation that leads to incarceration. It's not just about what I'm doing at the moment, it's about every aspect of that existence. So if I'm already in a state of poverty and maybe not having my needs met, once I get into the system, how am I able to fight for myself? How am I able to continue on to do and be something better? As a survivor of domestic violence, I didn't expect the system to punish every single one of my sisters in incarceration with me for surviving abuse, for not, understanding what boundaries should look like. It's not something most people are taught in the home. Boys are told to be silent, not speak up for themselves in a manner that's respectful and loving and supportive of one another. They're told to be silent and not cry, where women are told to cater to an adult figure and, to respect them and to honor their wishes. So how do I learn not to allow violence in my situation? I don't. I learn that as I grow up, hopefully mirroring others around me. If I have that good role model to see that maybe I deserve better and I deserve to have that dignity and respect. We hope now that we can start learning those things in school. Unfortunately, we have to push our way in to get people to want to allow us to teach those kind of things, because even in school, you have to obey that teacher, even if that teacher is doing something that could potentially be, harmful to my emotional state. How many times have we sat and, and heard somebody say, my teacher used to downgrade me in school and told me I was stupid, so I thought I would be nowhere. So now we're in a system. What are we going to get? We're getting that same from a correctional officer or even a teacher inside. So many teachers told me inside incarceration, because of my sentence of life without the possibility of parole, that they didn't have time to put any effort into someone like me. They need to only worry about people that were getting out of incarceration, because they were going to be the future community. Yet here I sit. If I wouldn't have fought for myself, I would still be in there. And it took learning that I deserved better inside incarceration to figure out that, I'm worthy of more. And there's so many people in there just like me. I'm just one of hundreds of women that I spoke with every day about wanting and needing change and deserving to teach our children the same way, so that we don't need the police. I learned very, very early on that the police were my enemy. So when it came time to need them, of course, I didn't know that there was any other way but then, to fear them and want to have nothing, else to do with them. When I now understand that they have a component in life that needs to be about more than just, prosecuting people, of finding something negative in every situation. The truth is every police stop is a danger to anyone. It shouldn't have to be that way, but the police have too much power, and we need to find ways to change that so that they become a component of existence until we can relieve them of that duty and have communities work together to learn, whether it's in an educational setting or maybe even just like a boys and girls club where they learn how to negotiate problems instead of using violence. People want that, they just don't know how to get it, so they think the police is the only option, and all they're doing is detaining and torturing.
Thank you for that, Kelly. Greatly appreciate it, and proud that the Ella Baker Center gets to work in partnership with the California Coalition for Women Prisoners. Just want to say that and name that. I am, again, I feel like over the moon just to get to moderate this panel. So y'all will have to forgive me. I'm kind of like jumping out of my slippers over here, my house slippers here at home. But I am going to keep the panel going, and I'm going to try to do something tricky, which is bring in a little bit of something I'm seeing from the Q&A into this question about violence. Because I see someone asking, what do we do about inter-community relationships, this lack of trust between communities that are divided by race? So class, geography, etc. So if you could speak as you talk about how are we addressing violence, if you could speak to that aspect of it as well, and I'm gonna open it back up.
Okay, so there's kind of like two parts of that question, now three. So I'll try to address all of those parts. So in July of last year, Wall Street Journal did a study and found out that the largest 50 cities, in the largest 50 cities, 36 of them saw a double-digit increase in their murder rates compared to the previous years. And some police departments have also reported a rise in domestic violence. And so advocates have been spending months and months warning at the beginning of the pandemic that that measures are needed to fight the pandemic, such as social distancing and isolation, could leave people trapped at home with their abusers, which will lead to an increase of intimate partner violence. This is especially present within the trans community, because many of the trans women killed this year had some kind of relationship with their killer. So according to a friend of mine, Rodrigo Hang Leighton, who's a deputy executive director for the policy and action at the National Center for Gender Equality, said that there are multiple women who were killed by their boyfriends or men who they were seeing, who knew that she was transgender, but then they freaked out about their friends or other people around them finding out that she was trans, and so they murdered her. And that happened to more than one trans woman. And these are the people who claim to love them. And now in last year, we saw 44 trans people who are or trans or gender nonconforming people who are fatally shot or killed by other violent means, the majority of which were Black and Latinx trans women. And the number nearly doubles from 26, which were lost in 2019. And many of these people are actually misgendered by local police and media in police reports, which can delay our awareness of deadly incidents. And on top of this, we've lost this year Monica Roberts, the trans griot, which you can locate her blog at trans griot, spelled GRIOT. .blogspot.com, and she was actually had a great love of statistics, and she would keep statistics of all the people who we've lost to transphobia, and we no longer have somebody in our community doing that work. And so to answer the question, it's like, yes, it's a lot of inter-community violence. It's also like it's and a lot of it has to do with dismantling some of the things that we are dealing with within our own communities. Like we said this before, we have to dismantle transphobia to dismantle violence. Like we have to like if we want less violence, we need to dismantle poverty, because this we see like it exacerbates situations where people are put in precarious situations to survive, and it increases violence for trans folks, because it puts us it makes us more at risk by making us homeless and making us jobless, by making us rely upon survival sex work and other kinds of ways of securing an income that are not safe. And so there's just so much of this that can be answered in the fact that like gender-based violence for trans people starts with, first of all, dismantling transphobia, dismantling patriarchy, dismantling capitalism, funding our futures, making legislation that allows us to be able to have an equitable life, so that we don't have to go into some of these like nefarious pathways, things that cause damage to our lives, which incite violence, which cause exacerbate crime. So I think that is like one of for trans folks, as far as gender-based violence goes, that's how we solve the problem.
Really appreciate that, Lilac. I see Kirby coming off mute.
Yeah, I mean, I really want to uplift that capitalism created the conditions that we are experiencing within our communities in terms of like violence that we experience. And that was what Elder Kelly, do you want me to call you Kelly or Elder Kelly? Anyway, I'm gonna respect my OGs and call you Elder Kelly. But she was mentioning when she was talking about looking at violence and our conditions in a whole sense, like really looking at the conditions that capitalism makes within our communities. And when we talk about violence, the pandemic, right? The way that I'm laughing because it was a joke. It's still kind of a joke, right? In the way that the system responded to it within our communities, the intentional racism, the intentional eviction, the intentional unemployment, 54 million people applying for unemployment within this country, intentional food shortage, intentional incarceration within your home, right? Where people were experiencing the most violence because there was no place for anybody to go. And the thing that is so interesting to see is that even though our communities made it clear that we were experiencing violence, that we were experiencing harm, that we were experiencing abuse, and not just by police, because one of the things that we also experience with police violence during the pandemic is an increase in politicians allowing police to have carte blanche to literally abuse people who are in the street. We saw videos of police officers putting their whole boots on people's necks because they were outside without a mask on, right? But that's a whole nother panel for a whole nother time. But we saw that our voices, as usual, weren't being listened to, right? And so it's interesting that there can be a report on violence that happens in our community to uplift the propaganda of needing more police, right? Because that's what it's for, right? To uplift these statistics to say, well, we need more police to keep people safe, when we know actually police don't keep victims of intimate partner violence or interpersonal violence safe. We know that, right? And furthermore, to add insult to injury, is that during one of the most critical moments of our history, right? Of our survival since the Great Depression, our needs were still not tended to, right? Which makes the case for the necessity for us to listen to our community members, for us to continue work of transformative justice, being that lens and that space so people can be safe. What would it look like if instead of the billions of dollars that police departments receive all over this country of our tax dollars be put into spaces where people who need housing can go to get away from their abusers? What would it look like if people can have actual employment in doing work like activism and transformative justice work instead of being forced, right, to enter work that leaves them unsafe, right? What would it look like for people to actually have food and CSAs all over our neighborhood for free groceries? Or how about no Whole Foods, right, and affordable food markets in our community so people can actually eat? But because of capitalism's ultimate violence against our communities, what we see is a neglect of our needs that fosters more violence within our homes. People who have no housing were staying with lovers who abuse them, who threaten evictions. That's something that we came across in our work in Audre Lorde Project, where people hooked up with folks didn't have a place to stay because they were facing eviction, and then encountered abuse by the person that they hooked up with, right? Or the fact that there are no resources for any housing, really, for anyone who suffers intimate partner violence. So from the beginning, not only did the pandemic set up our communities for an extreme downfall, the system in itself deliberately and violently continuously ignore the needs of our communities and set us up to continue down a road of violence and harm.
Yeah, and I think in so many ways, it's like COVID has been like a heart-wrenching, like death-strewn masterclass in how violence is structural, right? Like it's been like gasoline on the fire of the most durable drivers of violence, right? Like you think about the rates of exposure and illness among essential workers, a great portion of whom are Black and brown people, limited access to healthcare, skyrocketing homelessness, hunger, rising inequity, deepening poverty. Like we know, and in that still like communities of color hit with disproportionate loss, racked with disproportionate grief, like layered into that, the like continually visible deadly violence at the hands of police, that interconnectedness of the divestment from life affirming infrastructure on the one hand and investment on law enforcement on the other is like stark as can be in this time. And I feel like COVID has revealed in a way that maybe people can see because they are part of the experience of it, the way violence is structural, because you know it didn't increase in 1 year, like individual evil. It's not like what happened in 2020 is that just like people got more evil. And if we believe that violence is the result of people's like personal moral failures, then we have to be talking about some like strange godly shit where like all of a sudden like evil rose within the people in ways it had not before. Like that is not what happened. What happened is the things that have always produced violence were exacerbated simultaneously, collectively, everywhere in a way that we could see. And it's one of the things that I think underscores the lessons of our teachers like Dr. Ruthie Wilson Gilmore or Dr. Angela Davis, that abolition is not mostly a project of tearing down, it's a project of building. Like it's a project of investing. It's a project of ensuring those things that keep people safe exist and are fortified by both resources and power. And so I do think there is an opportunity in our collective conversation about violence to be like, what do you think happened during COVID? Like, A, humans got more evil for inexplicable reasons, or B, violence actually comes from this other shit. And I think there's a way in which we can start to see to option B and push past the stories that are about why specific people exhibit certain moral failings, which happen in every community, those conversations, and get at the heart of the things that could actually produce safety in the ends.
Appreciate all of those comments. I'm just going to ask that we take a collective in breath and a collective out breath, because we are dealing with a lot and y'all are moving through it and letting people know how it is and what it is. And I need to do that. And this is a good time for me to take a little bit of a CLE break, because I'm supposed to tell folks that the CLE code is Pepper 43, which, you know, it's a little bit of that's a little bit of humor right now for y'all. Is Pepper 43 is capital PEPPER 43, and we gotta bring humor to it too, because we are dealing with some heaviness. And one of the things that I appreciate is just the brilliance of y'all questions from the audience, because I feel like you knew what we wanted to talk about. And I'm going to be combining another question here. One of the questions from the audience is currently police are overly reliant on, police are overly relied upon for mental health crises, getting called out for welfare checks, et cetera. So what sort of community health supports infrastructure do we need to create, imagine a world without police, which to me connects to the question that we had come up together, is just like, if you could talk about your vision for first responders. So anybody want to jump in on this question first? Lilac, I see you.
Hi, yeah, hi. So yeah, I've actually been doing a lot of thinking about that, and trying to find my notes. Excuse me. I came across this interesting article in it was I'm not sure it was like it was a paper in Denver that talked about this program called the STAR program, which stands for Support Team Assistance Response. And previously, Denver 911 operators only directed calls to the fire department or the police and first responders. But the STAR team pilot program created a third track for directing emergency calls to a two-person team, a medic or a clinician, and a staff in the van. And it will work usually like 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. on weekdays, because it was like a very like underfunded fledgling program. But and it launched in June, and even with all the like the troubles of COVID and things like that, it was the first person-centric mobile crisis response that community members actually that responded to community members experiencing problems related to mental health, depression, poverty, homelessness, or substance abuse. And actually, it was wildly successful and is being expanded all across Denver, but it's actually based on a program that was created in Eugene, Oregon. And they went to study this model because over there, first responders are part of a robust training system where they're where mental health or these kinds of crisis calls are immediately catered to by these people who are trained and are paid for their work to be first responders. And I think those kinds of models offer us actually like a gateway to actually finding solutions. But the thing is that to this, like to like the first responders being actually somebody who is equipped to deal with this, as somebody who is a mental health psych ward survivor of violence within in both times that I was held. I experienced violence at the hands of the orderlies there, gender-based violence especially. Just like horrific things that happened that don't need to happen. I think that we need to understand that abolition also includes abolishing the mental health industrial complex and the way that that works to imprison people who the way that people have been treated in mental health facilities is really abhorrent, and we need to just change the way that mental health is really talked about in this country overall. And that's what a lot of the work that I do personally at Fireweed Collective, where I have Fireweed Collective, our trainings and our webinars, we offer on topics like emotional first aid, offer actual real methodologies that help folks intervene when they see folks experiencing emotional distress, which prevents violence and also supports survivors of violence. Our support groups also provide pathways for healing for survivors of violence, and we have been first responders at sites of state violence, like Standing Rock, where we offered street therapy for water protectors who would rather actually come and speak to us, speak to us when we came to them than go to a medic tent, where they had like a therapist on site. My work at Mirror Memoirs, a nonprofit that advocates for queer and trans and intersex survivors of childhood sexual assault, creates channels for solidarity and support and mutual aid for survivors of violence. Even as members of our as members of our core team are subject to violence all the time. One of our core members is a trans intersex woman who was attacked on the streets of Los Angeles, and we rallying around to support her. And so some of our board members include people like Bambi Salcedo of Trans Latina Coalition that does abolition work here in Los Angeles and in California, working with to liberate trans folks from ICE detention facilities, another one of our board members is CC McDonald, who was if you're aware of the Free CC campaign that happened around 2000, in the last 10 years, around 2014, the trans community rallied around a woman who was attacked unprovoked by a skinhead in Minneapolis on her way home from the grocery store. And she happened to be in fashion school and had a pair of trimming shears, which she ended up using to protect herself. The man died of his wounds, and she was sent to men's prison because of this. And so, like, we have to think about like the kind of people who are actually designing these projects have to be people who are survivors of violence, people who have survived state violence, people who are organizing on the field, have their hands, in the work. My work as a co-founding core member of the Los Angeles Funi Collective has led me to create the Limitless Letters program, a pen pal program that connects trans incarcerated folks with disabled trans folks. And this is based on my research, based on Foucault's panopticism theory that purports that incarcerated folks in prisons and people in hospitals and schools are surveilled in the same way to create productive members of society. And so we're using this this similarity between disabled folks who are used to being surveilled because of their lack of productivity as disabled people, and also folks who are incarcerated, to create a community connection there where folks can actually get have support, but it's actually more tangible because, like disabled people, incarcerated people are often targets for violence. So sending incarcerated trans folks letters actually creates more safety for them by showing the cruel prison guards who are power tripping, slave driving overseers that someone on the outside cares about incarcerated people, and abuse will be reported if needed. We can help keep our siblings alive. And likewise, our mutual aid care web creates avenues of support for survivors of violence. We have raised money for survivors of domestic violence, transphobic assaults, and for refugees of state violence. So that is I guess like more than enough, but I thank you for allowing me the space to talk about this issue that on a very multifaceted level.
Of course. Who wants to pick this question of first responders, mental health? And we can also, I can do like a 2-for-1 question where y'all can respond to the next question as well. It's about, we came up with this question just about 2020. And we've talked about kind of the relationship between the visions for abolition and transformation and what that has to do with capitalism. So if folks want to speak to that, but also speak to this transition of power inside the empire that is the United States. Many breathed kind of a sigh of relief when Donald Trump was finally removed from office. Just wondering, how are folks relating to this new Democratic administration? What should people be doing? What are your thoughts on these questions as it relates to the transition of power? Anybody want to take this up?
I can start. If it was up to a lot of people, that first weekend in November, you would have thought the revolution happened in the United States. People were so relieved that the idea of the system operating on both sides of the coin, of both political parties continuing to marginalize and oppress Black and Brown communities didn't exist. You would have thought they washed it all away. Actually, we have a bigger duty to continue to organize because there is another party in office, a party that has proven itself to be the enemy of oppressed people, right? Biden was a huge supporter of the 1994 crime bill. He had his hands in writing that bill. Hillary Clinton called Black women welfare queens and said that Haiti deserved the 8.5 earthquake that it experienced in 2010. Right? And these are people that come to our communities and give speeches to get us to vote for them, and then completely turn their back on our communities when they get into office and leave us with mass police brutality, increase in mass incarceration, lack of food support or education support. Kamala Harris allowed the arrest of so many Black people within her recent history as a politician. But Malcolm X said that, the media will have you calling your enemy innocent, right? And I think it's very critical for us to have that history, to have that context when we're talking and thinking about what victories are, right? And who makes victories. Any struggle that we have won, any step forward that we have made is only because of people power that has been garnered. Is only through organizing. And I don't mean being on the front lines and yelling and going to jail. I'm not saying that. That's just one tactic. But every tactic that we use as organizers is the only reason that there has been any type of progress within capitalism within this country, right? Looking back at a history that starts with an indigenous people that barely exist on the land anymore. Right. We've seen violence from Republican parties and Democratic parties within the United States because they both serve the needs of capitalism. They don't serve us, right? To get our votes, they act like they serve us. But within our work, we have to actually serve each other. We have to actually serve the people. There was a person who asked a question about how do we build trust in communities, right? How do we have conversations to organize? This is a question that Zach brought up before. And one of the main steps is political education. People are jumping into struggle because it's something that you feel emotionally. When people saw George Floyd and Tony McDade and Breonna Taylor be murdered, it was so jarring that people had to get out into the streets, into the community, right? That movement did not last because there's an inconsistency of follow-up and political education. How will people know to continue to organize for the liberation, for abolition, if they don't know where that struggle came from in the beginning? Or they don't know how to steer that emotion to continue to fight on, right? And for us in this moment where we are getting a whole bunch of Band-Aids during the first week of Biden's election, this is actually the moment for there to be political education and de-escalation training. This is the moment where there should be political education and transformative justice. This is the moment when we should be talking about abolition and what it means and what it looks like and all the contradictions of capitalism, right? The same capitalism that will smack you across the face and then hide its hand and tell you to vote for a Democrat that 20 years before voted against you in the first place.
Indeed. Kelly, I want to bring you into the conversation as well, because we haven't heard from you as much. I just want to get your thoughts on this. And I'm going to give Danielle an opportunity. I saw you coming off mute, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. Kelly?
Yeah, definitely brought up because, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Can you hear me? Sorry about that. I don't know what's happening. I think it's really important, all the points that you brought up, because we think that we've solved the problem because we have someone new, but that grass is definitely not always greener on the other side. And there are so many opportunities that our vice president had as, you know, the Attorney General of California, standing on the ground saying, I'm here against domestic violence and I'm fighting for the people, and I help create a...
Oh, I think we might have lost Kelly. Danielle, I'm going to pass it to you. And then we'll come back to Kelly when she's able to rejoin.
Sure. Oh, I'm in the middle of her sentence, so let me find mine. I mean, I felt the amount of relief people experienced that day, like to Kirby's point. And I think the best way I was able to describe it is it felt like there is a house on fire and everyone we love is inside. And like what happened that day in November, we did not get everyone out of that house. We did not grieve those that we had already lost, for whom it was too late. We did not build somewhere for us to live as that thing burns to the ground. But we did tackle one crazy motherfucker at the front door who was standing there with a hose full of gasoline. And that's not nothing. It is far from everything. And it's not nothing. And I think about like the serenity prayer and like, I want the serenity to accept the things the president cannot change, the courage to make one change the things they can, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? Like really understanding what is and isn't different feels really important to have that kind of level of discernment, because I think there is a slightly higher chance this current administration will feel politically obligated, which is different than saying the goodness of their heart. Like we'll feel politically obligated to be responsive to organized mass movement. Like I think there is a reality of collective power that is clear to them to some degree and can be made clear. And so just echo very deeply what Kirby offered of like, that means it is our job to build power. It is our job to exert pressure. I think this administration is less likely to gun us down in the streets for rising up. That's worth something, but it's only worth something if we rise up in those streets. And so I think to understand you know, like the lesson from my elders as a kid, which is like, you know, when you're voting to select the enemy you want, right? Like, so it doesn't mean you're selecting your best friend, but I prefer this enemy. I think we stand a better chance. And I don't want to diminish the immediate changes in people's lived experiences for whom those executive orders are the difference between life and death, the difference between freedom and incarceration. I remember the wave of loss those first days of the Trump administration. I remember like the tears among people, and we all went to JFK when the Muslim ban dropped, you know, like so I don't want to devalue the material meaningful difference, because I think every single person's survival matters, every single person's freedom matters, and I don't want to pretend that's nothing, but also do not want to get confused and think that what we need to do now is just like watch justice unfold on Twitter and celebrate until we have to vote again in 4 years.
Appreciate that. And I'm going to start bringing in some questions from the Q&A. And one of the things that I appreciate, Lilac, is that you really brought us to look at these problems from a global perspective right in that first question. And one of the questions comes from an organizer who's based in Brazil, who describes that there are areas dominated by the power of basically paramilitaries, which are part of the state's own machinery. And this person has a question about how to stimulate a debate about protection and safety that doesn't center the inalienability of property law, or I guess the, you know, upholding property law as being paramount. And there was a related question, I thought, that I'm going to bring in and ask that you all speak to together, and that was about the rise of our own far right and acts of terror here in the United States. And the question is like, how do we address far right acts of terror without it becoming chaos? Everyone's concealed carry, like that's the question there. So really talking about kind of far right insurgency in this context of keeping us safe and how we can think that through. I'm glad I don't have to answer that question. So y'all's thoughts on talking this one through. And sorry, if you don't want to answer that question, because we got 2 minutes left, leave me with your thoughts. I'm realizing that we have a hard stop in a couple of minutes, so feel free to just give us your closing thoughts. Thank you, behind the scenes folks, who reminded me.
I think we have to remember that this is a part of that. First of all, like divesting from property laws involves divesting from property, divesting from nation states being the answer to how we function as human beings. Like this grab for land and grab for resources has not been liberatory in any way, and to be especially in the West, it has caused us to, you know, oppress, whether we like it or not, oppress people in the global South. And through corporate free economic structures, we're relying upon, you know, we are consistently relying or codepending upon these resources and this labor from people in the global South, which then of course brings inequities into their world, which we're unfamiliar with often as Americans and unconcerned with. And so being equitable in that sense, and being stewards of I guess like economic equity and giving people the capacity to be autonomous. I think that's where we start in that regard. So, and that's where from that is divesting from capitalism. You know, divesting from capitalism is going to be the only thing that leads to actual change.
Right on. 30 seconds, y'all.
Just really quickly, I think the way that we can fight against any violence towards our community is to be prepared. And that's work that I do. Community security training. What does that look like at demonstrations, at events, at actions, even on a Zoom call? Safety planning for our community members for your mental health, physical health, community health, and de-escalation training. If anybody want to learn any of these skills, skills that you can teach other people and literally create this buffer to keep state violence out as much as we can, please touch base with me. I put my information into the chat. We have to be prepared. And the best way for us to be prepared is to learn how to actually do community safety through an abolitionist radical lens.
Wow, thank you, Kirby. Danielle, and then Kelly, or Kelly?
I'm happy to yield my time to Kelly.
Okay, right on. Kelly, last thoughts you got? Want to close us out?
I appreciate everyone who took the time to watch. It's been an amazing opportunity to reach out of what our situation is and look for solutions. And we've had such an amazing opportunity to see what solutions could look like and look at situations that are happening to others. So I appreciate everybody for that today.
Right on. Just want to say thank you all for joining this panel. We're going to close it out now and just appreciate you. Reminder to our panelists to go off video, and I'm going to do the same. And you have our contact information, so stay in touch, y'all. Peace.
Thank you, everyone. That was really an amazing panel. I was very moved to hear you guys all share and just speak so powerfully about the way that violence is created and manufactured by policing and capitalism, and the ways that community care and safety are cultivated despite that. That was just really great. So moving on to a couple logistics before we start our next panel. If you are an attorney seeking CLE credit, you must have registered with us in advance, and you must write down any CLE codes that the moderator announces and displays during the panel. Just a quick note, you will want to be in gallery view in order to see that code. Also, we have a student group here at NYU called Ending the Prison Industrial Complex, and they'll be hosting a post-colloquium conversation tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern to debrief and discuss how the panels contributed to or shifted our collective understanding of the movements to defund and abolish the police, and how to translate those ideas into action going forward. It will be open to everyone, and if you're interested, you can RSVP to that event at a link that will be sent in the chat. So with that, let's move on to the final panel, Defunding the Police in Practice, where we will hear from organizers who are waging campaigns to defund the police in cities across the United States. We'll also hear about the different strategies and tactics that they've used, what barriers they've faced, and what strategies have proven most effective. This panel is moderated by Amna Akbar, a professor at Ohio State University Moritz College of Law, where her teaching and scholarship focuses on social movements, critical theory, and policing race and inequality. Her scholarship explores the intersections of national security and criminal law, and the potential of social movements to transform our thinking about law enforcement, and law reform. Professor Akbar previously taught at NYU Law School and the City University of New York Law School, and was a staff attorney at Queens Legal Service Corp. All right, take it away, Professor Akbar.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Claire. It's my great honor to be here with this panel of organizers doing visionary and difficult work all over the country. Thanks to NYU Journal of Law and Social Change for all that you did to build this space in the way that you have. Thank you to the organizers and on this panel and the organizers and protesters all over the country who've made this panel possible for your work this past year and for the past several decades. We are grateful for your labor, your persistence, your organization, and your vision. We receive your loving work, and we are thinking this evening about how to step into it and build with you. So we don't have a lot of time this evening. I'm going to briefly introduce each panelist and then start the conversation up. Antonin Pierre is a community organizer with Communities United for Police Reform and the deputy director of the Brooklyn Movement Center. She has worked on building Black power in a gentrifying neighborhood to end sexualized street harassment in central Brooklyn. She has led on several campaigns, including Defund NYPD, Passing the Right to Know Act, and the Justice for Eric Garner campaign. Datra Didi Jackson is an organizer, trainer, big sister, godmother of four, and national director of BYP 100 and co-founder of the Durham chapter of BYP 100. Didi has had her hand in efforts and actions such as bringing participatory budgeting to Durham, Durham Beyond Policing, Justice for RIFA campaign, Black Mamas, and Black August bailouts, and more. William Truthmays Harris is an activist with Reclaim the Block, a Minneapolis-based organization that organizes to defund the police. As an experiential arts and culture educator, he weaves the preservation of Black culture, liberation, spirituality, street consciousness, and activism into his personal life, classroom, music, and community. James Birch grew up in Natick, Massachusetts, with the direct impacts of the carceral system on his immediate family. After going to law school, he became a member and then director of policy of the Bay Area's Anti-Police Terror Project and the president of the Bay Area National Lawyers Guild. He also worked as the policy director for St. James Infirmary, a peer-based sex worker health and advocacy clinic in San Francisco. Chaz Moore is an activist and community organizer with the Austin Justice Coalition. AJC has led reform efforts such as creating the Austin Police Department's use of force policy, successfully fought a union contract, and successfully campaigned for the reallocation of $150 million from the Austin Police Department's budget to begin the process of creating real public safety. So I was hoping that there would be some way for the audience to show this amazing group of organizers some love using emojis of some sort, but it sounds like that's not possible. But it's so great to be here with all of you. And I know that everyone, almost 300 people that are here are really excited to hear from you. So we're gonna start with 2 questions and then open it up to have maybe a little bit more of a dynamic conversation. So with this first question, I'm gonna ask Antonin, then Didi, then Truth, then James, then Chaz to respond. So as you all know, as Critical Resistance puts it, abolition is both a vision and a practice, a horizon and a way to organize our work today. As such, campaigns and organizing are at its center. And Defund the Police is one sort of campaign, but I know that you have all worked on many. So I just was hoping we could start with hearing from each of you something about a PIC, Prison Industrial Complex, abolition campaign that you are working on right now. So Antonin, do you want to start us off?
Yes, and it's pronounced Antonine, which is, it's not obvious. So
thanks for correcting me.
Yeah, no problem. So hi folks, my name is Antonine Pierre. I am the deputy director at an organization called the Brooklyn Movement Center, and we're located in Bed-Stuy, where we cover Bed-Stuy and Crown Heights, and our work really is hyper-local organizing that we know being in a historically Black neighborhood in Brooklyn really has ramifications that are citywide and national. So really excited to be here with all you good folks who are doing this work. So a lot of, our work around community safety, because our work isn't really only police accountability work, it's in the context of community safety, and it is understanding that that police are a threat to Black people's safety, period, and point blank. And that there are many other threats to Black people's safety, and that our community safety work revolves around police accountability, as well as anti-street harassment work, and really thinking about in general, right? Like, how do we keep ourselves safe? And this is where, a lot of the defund work came out of. I think people think that defund just kind of dropped out of the sky. It came out of nowhere, but we build our defund work on the backs of so many folks who have been doing this work for a long time. I mean, much love to BYP 100, I think, for really leading this work around funding Black futures. And, I think the defund gets all of the attention because everyone is really scared that we want to get rid of police tomorrow. And it's not really about police. It's never, safety is never actually about police. Safety is really about how are we providing what people require to be safe. And in the last year, the context of the pandemic has shifted everything. And what it means and feels to be safe, people feel so viscerally, right? Like we have folks, you know, basically people are like, I'll pay my rent because I could skimp on groceries, right? Like we'll skip meals, we'll eat without meat so that we can make our rent, right? Like people are in New York City. I mean, I don't know about your cities, but in New York City, students are really suffering, right? Like the quality of education is poor, and worse yet, people don't even have a lot of the tools that they need in terms of laptops and tablets to actually participate. So when, you know, people might be confused, like, why is she talking about all this stuff? We're here to talk about policing, but this is the safety piece, right? Like if my kid doesn't have a laptop and can't be engaged in school, then they're going to go out on the street like a kid would go out on the street and do whatever kids do. And we live in a society that criminalizes whatever kids do. So the defund campaign at its core is it's not about the NYPD. It's not about getting rid of the NYPD. It really is about how do we look at Black people in this country who have been oppressed for centuries, and how do we look at Black people in Black neighborhoods? And when I say we, I also mean Black elected officials looking at Black people in Black neighborhoods and say to them, actually, we're coming out of a pandemic, and what you actually need more than food, more than education, more than stable housing is a $6 billion police budget, right? Like you actually need a cop car on your block more than your kid needs a laptop. You need the police patrolling your neighborhood more than you need more food in your fridge, right? So I think it's just important that we're really clear about what are the choices the government is actually asking us to make, and are those the choices that we want to make, or are they choices that we're being scared into making because the NYPD presents itself as the only ones who can keep us safe, even though Black and brown folks know NYPD often shows up after harm has been committed, and they don't do much to actually rectify the harm or create community accountability, which is really the thing that we're after. So that was a long-winded way of saying, when we are talking about defunding the police, when we are talking about removing money from the NYPD, what we are actually talking about is creating Black futures that are powerful, that are viable, that are vibrant, and allow us to be more than people who are over-policed, over-criminalized, and really not given the tools that we need to survive coming out of a pandemic.
Thanks so much, Antonine. Didi, do you want to go next?
Yes. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. Really appreciate the work and excited to dig into this conversation with folks that I read up on and follow around the organization's work that they're doing. So thank you for having me. So my name is Didi, or Deatra Jackson. Most people call me Didi. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the national director of BYP 100. And majority of what I'll be coming in with tonight is the experience of building the Durham Beyond Policing campaign. So in 2016, a few of us that were part of making a bunch of different direct actions happen. I wouldn't call us an organization or a group of people. We were just a group of people that were organizers in the city. And we got together with another organization called SONG, Southerners on New Ground, has a chapter in Durham. And as we were building the BYP 100 chapter, we were fighting with our city council because they were moving forward on a plan of spending $81 million on a brand new police headquarters in Durham. And Durham is a medium-sized city. It's about the equal amount of white folks to Black folks and other folks of color. And it was going to be built right across the street from projects. And we got together to pull off a campaign and really push our city council around not approving the construction. And we showed up pretty much every city council meeting, really pushing. And what we needed to really do was talk to folks in our city to get a sense of, if they had $81 million to spend on their city, what would they spend it on? And we surveyed folks in the neighborhood that they were close, that they were going to be building the headquarters, folks at the bus stations, just wherever we knew Black people to be, and especially in those areas, and asked them if they had $81 million to spend on a police headquarters, what would they spend it on? And nobody said the police, and nobody said a police building. And so we pushed on for the city council to really like take a look at the actual results of what folks were saying that they would do with that level of money. And of course, they went on to build the police headquarters, and we were able to win some other things alongside our campaign because of the coalitions and relationships we were building with, for instance, the local city workers union, who were pushing for a livable wage. And we were able to win that within the first year of the campaign starting. And in Durham, majority of the folks that are in the Durham County Jail are in there for what we would call poverty crimes, mostly larceny, maybe robbery, but for the most part, it's poverty crimes. And really pushing on that narrative of the idea that police are more policing is the answer to really do something about this crime rate around larceny and the amount of people that were in the jail. But if folks are in the jail for larceny crimes, and if the city also has a cash bail system, like what does that actually mean? What are the opportunities granted to those people? They're very limited. The lack of access is always there. And so really pushing on many of our elected officials, our DA, along with our sheriff, which is an elected position, to end cash bail in our city. And we were drawing those many different connections in with under the realm of policing in the city, thinking about not only the budget, but also what are the many different interactions that folks actually have with the police, and that defund the police as a demand is not just about the police. It is about the police budgets, and it's also very much about the amount of interactions that people actually have to have with the police, right? So why do we need the police when you lock your keys in your car? Why do we need the police for a car accident? Why do we need the police for just so many different, for domestic violence situations, right? So really pushing on the different ways that Black people, poor people in our cities have to engage with the police, and how that increases the amount of opportunities for violence, sexual assault, misconduct, brutality, all of the things that we know to come with the police, and not safety. And so the campaign has been moving over the past 5 years, pushing for this proposal that we have, which is around community safety. It's a community safety and wellness task force, which is a body of community members. So not the police and not our elected officials, but community members that apply at the level of the city, at the level of the county, and at the level of the school, to push for more funding and more alternatives to policing that are centered in community safety and wellness. And we were able to push that through when our city council was trying to hire an additional 72 cops. We were able to organize to get them to vote no against adding the 72 new cops, and really push for this alternative, which was a task force to exist at every level. And so we're able to actually move in our campaign with a multitude of strategies that exists at the level of working with the city, working with the county, working with the school district. And also we're able to continue to doing the organizing on the ground and base building, and continuing to ask people, if you had the kind of money that they spend on police, what would you do with it? So that's a little bit about my work.
Thanks, Dee Dee. Truth?
Yes, thank you. I just want to first uplift the work in Durham. Powerful, just very powerful, and I just basically want to compliment the steady and smooth delivery on such powerful work. Yo, all right. So, with Reclaim the Block, presently our main focus is that, like, with the uprising after the murder of Brother George Floyd, a lot of attention was given to a small organization that started a couple of years back with the focus of, shifting the power by basically demanding that money be put in areas where it's needed the most. And so where we're at right now is building within the community and building within the community of the queer, people of color, marginalized folks, the poor, the homeless, people that are involved in street work and are also involved in some of the campaign towards shifting the narrative, pressing what it is that we want through the charter policy and then through the charter process. So a lot of what we're doing now is pushing to fund and support organizations that are doing some of the same work, organizations that have risen up and that have already been in place and that are doing specific work that we ourselves are inclined to support, because at the end of the day, everybody has a different hand in on accomplishing the goals of liberation through an abolitionist mindset. So this is what we're doing currently. So there's a lot of focus on building within the Black and Native communities and clearing up some of the confusion that has been caused by the colonist mindset, to get people more on board to understand that it might sound a little scary when we're talking about such drastic change like defunding the police, and meanwhile the crime has seemed to rose overnight, but that's not true. As a matter of fact, just on a call yesterday with some Native elders, I had to basically exclaim that as a teenager, the same area I'm in was basically no different than it is now. And right where I live, within the 8 years that we've lived here, we've seen crime escalate. There was a murder at the end of my block, and there were no police around after or before. And so, you know what I'm saying? So it's one of those things where I feel like the number one job for us, and we have an opportunity as activists and organizers, is to build and deepen our relationships in the community and keep on fueling the fire, informing people through political education, and also soon coming up with the PMA process and like seeing what more we can do through those processes. So our work is going to continue to be working within community to strengthen other leadership and follow through on the work.
Thanks, Truth. Before we turn to James, can I just ask you, what does PMA stand for?
People's Movement Assemblies.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's so great. As other folks have said, it's just an honor to be among all these people whose work I follow, or who I follow on social media and look at what they do with great admiration, and try to take some lessons back to the Bay. It's great to share space with you all, so thank you. And thank you to the folks who put this together. This is a great opportunity. My name is James Birch. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the policy director for the Anti-Police Terror Project. We are a Black-led abolitionist organization that was founded in the wake of the murder of Oscar Grant by BART police more than 12 years ago. The organization was founded by Kat Brooks, Terha Ak, and Asantewaa Jordan. They're my movement mentors and have, among others, made an incredible amount of space for the movement in the Bay Area. It's important to name that our work in service of abolition is grounded in work supporting families who have been harmed by police violence. That's central to our work. Our organization it's really important for us to be grounded in the lived experience of those most impacted. So when we talk about a pathway to abolition, it needs to be a pathway that centers and includes those who are most impacted by police violence. And so when we talk about abolition and a removal of the carceral state, and we talk about families who are most impacted, who want justice by the conviction of law enforcement officers, I think that's a place in our work where we as advocates really need to focus on providing enough space for the whole movement. And so I just want to name that. When it comes to defunding the police, in 2016, we started Defund OPD. We wanted to reduce the budget of the Oakland Police Department by 50% and have that money reinvested in jobs, housing, healthcare, and other investments that improve public safety. We chose the invest-divest approach because it provided several entry points for folks who weren't otherwise receptive to an abolitionist framework, right? So, for instance, for people for whom police equals safety, right? They're taught that police prevent harm from the time they're a small child, and others who, from the time they're born, are taught that police cause harm, right? Shouting across that divide hasn't really gotten us the wide movement on the left that we need to move, that we need to shift the way policing is viewed in our society. And so we thought if we shifted that frame from a conversation of good versus bad when it comes to policing to a conversation about budget and spending priorities, we're able to move a lot of people for a couple reasons. So one, we spend a ludicrous amount of money on policing. Oakland spends 44% of its general fund. Many similarly situated municipalities spend a similar percentage. That means that housing, job services, all the things that we depend upon are consistently underfunded. Second, like for example, well, in the interest of time, I'll keep moving. Second, we as a society have agreed that police shouldn't or don't need to perform certain duties, like policing unhoused communities or confronting those in mental health crisis, but we still pay police millions and millions of dollars annually to engage in those functions, right? So like Dee Dee said, if you ask the people, they aren't gonna say that we need to spend millions to police the unhoused. They just need to know that that's what we are doing and that there's an opportunity to do things differently. And also, as Dee Dee said, there are many unnecessary interactions between our people and the police, because the police have kind of soaked up all of the municipal functions that occur, or even some social services, and so they just find themselves in a lot of unnecessary interactions. And so if you tell people that that's what police are doing, they'll agree that those are things that they shouldn't do. So for instance, again, with the unhoused communities, mental health interventions, traffic related, medical emergencies, just a number of, some nuisances. There's just a number of times that cops come and it's unnecessary. And then a couple other reasons. One, police are our most expensive workers, right? And so if you're trying to do municipal budgeting, you shouldn't send cops if you're trying to save money. And then like Antonine said, police are violence responders, not violence interrupters, right? Unlike how it's portrayed on the media, police come after the fact. So while solving a crime isn't a good measure of public safety, police aren't even good at that. They're not even good at that, right? And so we're spending a lot of money and getting nothing for it and not dealing with the root causes, right? And so using those arguments and structuring a campaign around the concept of defunding the police to fund our communities, we're able to partner with a lot of folks on the left, labor and community-based organizations, to really attack the budget that the administration's put forward that spends hundreds of millions of dollars on policing. In addition to Defund OPD, APTP has created Mental Health First, a mental health crisis hotline and responder model currently running on weekends in Sacramento and in Oakland. This is in response to countless deaths of people in mental health crisis across the Bay Area. Stephen Taylor was murdered by the San Leandro Police Department while in crisis in a local Walmart. Within 40 seconds of their arrival at the Walmart, Kayla Moore was killed in her own home. Miles Hall was killed trying to run past officers to get back to his home. And these are all, right in the East Bay, and countless more across the Bay Area and in California in general. And so we decided at APTP, we just needed to do something about it. And what we've been working on is a community-based hotline and a first responder service. So the theory is that a community-based alternative that people can trust will bring people who value Black life and Black dignity and respond to crises as such is what we need, right? And so that's what we sought to create. And then we're running a bill in California with Sidney Comlodger called the Crisis Act, which would provide 4-year grants for community-based organizations to provide crisis response services for mental health, like I was just talking about, or drug use emergencies, or emergencies facing members of the unhoused community, or interpersonal violence. Like I said, there are many communities who don't feel safe calling the police, or calling 911 or 311, or any number connected to the state. They need someone to call, and that's what we're trying to provide, not only locally, but provide funding for it at the state level.
Thanks, James. Chaz?
Yeah, first I just want to say I am a huge fan of all these folks, especially BYP, who I try to mimic as much as I can because they do some amazing work. And yeah, I don't have too much because here in Austin, Texas, we're trying to do a little bit of what everybody's doing, and I think Austin is very interesting to put it nicely because it's a very, very, very white place. The Black population in Austin is only about 7.8%. So the way we talk about these issues is very, very different. Because, and I think Antonine said it, and maybe Didi as well. Safety is something that, depending on what side of the city you live on, depending on what you look like, it's a completely different experience. So of course, when we talk about defunding the police, my white brothers and sisters automatically think like their safety is now at risk. So it's been very interesting for us to like navigate that conversation, similar to what James was saying. And the way we've done that here in Austin, again, with the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and we had this huge rally in June of 2020, where about 10,000 folks came out, and we really used that moment to ask, the city, the community, what does public safety really look like, depending on who you are. And we really began this process in that moment of challenging city council to rethink, the moral fabric that is a budget, and to really start thinking about ways of divesting from the police budget and investing in alternatives to public safety. And that's where we are today, right? Like in Austin, we're in this process of reimagining public safety, and taking as much money as we can away from the police department. And not just the money, also taking certain parts and fabrics of the police department, like 911, which forever, whatever reason, was a part of, and is a part of many police departments. It's its own independent thing. The forensics lab, which, I hope I don't have to explain why that's, problematic for that to be in the police department. Like that, now that's its own independent thing. We've also very recently, like within the last week, we're able to have a fourth option implemented into the 911 calls. So now when people call 911, they get fire, EMS, police, and mental health, because we know that police in 2016, I believe, here in Austin, Texas, had the highest murder rate per capita for killing people that were going through some type of mental health distress. So the main thing we're trying to do here, like, most other people, is just really get people to understand that this idea that safety comes from police is just an extreme false notion. Like Antonine said, like there's very little to no examples of police, like really preventing violence, right? They come after the assault, they come after the murder, they come after the like really bad things happen. So if we're talking about public safety, we must, in our opinion here locally, and in my personal opinion, invest in the things that can be preventive, right? Like I think if we invest in communities and alternatives to policing, we get better societal outcomes, right? So, we're doing some really good stuff. It's definitely rooted in community. It's rooted in people with lived experiences, and that seems to, like always, really get the ball moving. Because in Austin, again, with it being such a white place, and I'm just glad to be in even a Zoom space with my Black brothers and sisters. It's very, I think I have a first-hand view of how white people, and I think good to do white people, right? Like white people that really want to understand, but I get their reluctance or their fear in this misunderstanding that there are other ways to do things outside of these institutions that have been in place. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And I think the overall goal for us, and I agree with James, right? We can't, I mean, like we can, but in in the name of like trying to move the ball forward faster, we really try to get people to see and understand and critique like this one simple question, right? Does the police have to do everything, right? Like, do we really need police, people that are not adequately trained or not trained at all to deal with mental health problems, right? Do we really need police to like show up to traffic stops where there's no violence occurring, right? Like there's other ways we can deal with these things. And like part of our strategy is to really chip away at police departments and the institution of policing by taking away all these roles and all these jobs that we give them to show people, you know, okay, what do we actually need this thing for, you know? And the budget is just one part of that. I agree completely with what Antonine said, right? Like this conversation around safety is so much bigger than policing. It's really, to me, about getting to the root cause of like all this shit, which is white supremacy and racism, and you know, and really understanding that in order for people to be safe, that we have to invest in these communities. We have to invest in not even like these new ideas, right? People think a lot of what people are doing, like restorative justice and restorative practice and healing, like this isn't new, right? This is something that Black and Indigenous folks and trans women and trans folks have been doing for years. So like we're really just amplifying what the Black and Indigenous communities have been doing for years and saying, you know what, this is a proven method to actually provide the safety for communities of color and people that have been impacted unjustly and unfairly by the system of policing in this carceral state as a whole.
Wow, it's so humbling and inspiring to hear about all of the work that you're all doing. I just wanted to lift up, partly because I'm assuming that a lot of the people in the audience are law students and lawyers, and law students and lawyers, I think, tend to fixate on litigation as kind of like the only strategy or tactic available. And if you were listening to all of the brilliant organizing that was just shared with us, you heard about a whole range of tactics and strategies that these folks and people across the country are using in support of building abolitionist futures: protest, participatory budgeting, research and report writing, organizing, base building, mobilizing, political education, building coalitions in the left with labor, passing legislation, people's movement assemblies, building public safety institutions like hotlines, engaging in mutual aid and transformative justice. And that's just like a super quick recap of things that I heard people talking about. Also in hearing all of this kind of about this work, I really can feel, and I know it's like takes so much persistence, right? So just like all of the love and the labor, the energy, and the experimentation everyone shared is really, really powerful and a lot to think about and a lot we can learn from. Okay, so I thought we could now zoom out a little bit. So as people have been commenting on, abolitionist organizing and ideas kind of went a little bit mainstream over the summer with the protests. And the ideas have grown, the ideas and the number of people who are familiar with it and organizations have grown in number and strength in the last several years, but they've been around as well for decades, if not centuries, if you understand the connection between PIC abolition and the abolition of enslavement. But you've all participated in the work in different ways. What I was hoping we could hear from each of you about now is just sharing reflections and lessons, whether it's from the past year, the past 5 years, the past decade, whatever your time frame is, it's up to you. What do you see as our victories and challenges going forward? Has your sense of who the opposition is and who our possible allies are, has that changed? So those are the questions I was hoping we could hear from folks on, and we'll go around again. This time, Truth, James, Chaz, Dee Dee, and Antonine. And then after that, we can open it up and kind of just react and build on what others have said.
Beautiful, thanks. You know, I had to talk with one of my teammates and a very wise organizer, wiser than myself, before coming into this this engagement here and sharing, just because I felt like I really needed to plug in, so to speak, and to talk about like, you know, like, so there are some things that we can look at that are very positive that we've done, that we've moved in 2021. and still all of the work that still really needs to be continuously done again. And yeah, so there was that piece. But so in 2021, yeah, we did push to get money into community by shifting funds out of the Minneapolis Police Department, focusing on the cuts. And then we, the mounted patrol, that's something that was like a victory, like get you fools off the horses, because it's just menacing. And when they're on horses and spraying everybody with pepper spray, it's just crazy. So some of that street teams also focused on violence interruption and peacekeeping. So there was some relationships built where there were some not too good relationships where there was some bridging that was built because of all of the protests and all of the upheaval, and quite honestly a lot of sadness, even with a lot of my neighborhood still looking like bombs got dropped over here. Like I was just riding down the street today and I was just like, wow, this is whack. Like when I ignore it, it's one thing, and then I can't ignore it because of the feeling that I feel it exudes. And with that, it's like, it's still like presses up against us. So when I look at the victories, like I'm very happy for the things that have happened, like the mental support, crisis response shift, and things of that nature, like what Chaz was talking about. But still, the people are very distraught, and people think that themselves are the enemies at times. Like instead of looking at ourselves as the source for transformative power and being like in the front seat of our liberation, by using an abolitionist frame to like just recognize that we're also still dealing with a lot of hatred and separation in our communities that are most affected, and still we got a lot of work to do. So like there has been some success, and parking calls were moved out of the Minneapolis Police Department, things like that. Yet and still we have to reconnect a lot of what has been broken because of the distrust. And the young people up here are on fire right now. So one of the positive things I like is that I'm now working with a young man who's the head of a new organization, who's really fired up. And it's beautiful for me being from a different generation, from the same side of town, and looking at this bright young leadership who's focused on the 16 to 25-year-old age group, and they're serious about bringing charter issue up. They're serious about reparations. They're serious about how can we get ahead of the curve. How can we be responsible for tackling issues around housing and financial security. And this is all coming out of the young people right now. So I'm supporting them. I'm working with them. I'm helping them frame some things. And right now, a lot of buzz is happening behind the work. And so that's happening a lot of places around the city, in various different quadrants. So those are the positives, and still it's bittersweet. So, but I love it. Yeah.
Thanks, Truth. James?
I definitely appreciate that, Truth. A lot of people got activated over the last over the uprising, over the last period of time, and so I do see a lot of people trying to find their place in the movement and find where that work can be and how to engage, and so that is exciting. Additionally, what we've seen here in the Bay Area is just a wide front on the left, normally with a lot of infighting and the conflict and the nonprofit industrial complex, patriarchy, white supremacy, so many other factors that impede our work. It's difficult to unite against the state when the state wants to retrench in a system of policing that consistently causes violence to our people. And so I've seen in Oakland a more unified resistance. Labor and community-based organizations are working very closely together in this moment, and that's just, it provides so much capacity to educate people in the city, to mobilize people in the city, and to get people involved. Right, we all care, and we all care about the same things, but it's hard to get us all to care about the same thing at the same time. And so we're in one of those moments as the left in Oakland where we all are focused on the goal. And it's this budget cycle coming up at the end of June, and it's making sure that we're investing in the right things and not policing. And so it's just a unique moment that we haven't seen, and kind of one of our goals when it comes to the Defund OPD campaign. Because a front like that is needed to give cover to progressive policymakers or progressive city councilors if they're going to make moves. Like it's been very sobering to watch municipal politics over the last several years and really understand how difficult it is to give a politician enough cover in their community to take a bold stance and be brave. And that's something that we're fighting to do. And I think at this point, with so much momentum, we've been able to do that. I got to shout out Carol Fife, the council member in District 3 in Oakland, one of the organizers behind Moms for Housing, because she is both an organizer and community member and a council member at the same time, and really has, among many, many other people, galvanized the left. I single her out because it's just rare for a public official to come from such a deep organizing background to find their way on a city council. Alternatives to police are being formalized. Like I talked about mental health first earlier. Community Ready Corps based in Oakland just got contracted to do a community safety program on Laney College campus. And so as opposed to having the sheriff's department doing community security, there are going to be folks with deep roots in Oakland providing safety for everyone, and I mean everyone. And then the Black Organizing Project won their 10-year campaign to kick police out of the Oakland Unified School District. So again, there are folks moving across the left and we're really moving together. We're partnering with academia. I've been working with folks at UC Berkeley lately to make sure that city council have the research and the data that they need to implement these alternatives, right? It's another kind of cover that they need, and we've been working to give them access to academia and connect the dots there. I feel like academia always wants to help and just kind of doesn't know how. And so making those connections and connecting the dots has been great. Some challenges. The nonprofit industrial complex is a huge challenge. It's a huge, huge, huge challenge. It's always centering organizations, people, and projects that aren't at the center of our work or aren't the most impacted, and then investing millions and millions of dollars in those things, right? Whose work ultimately maintains the status quo because they're chasing the ideas that are developed by my colleagues on this panel who are at the center of the work. Right. And so, they're just a degree removed from where all of the innovation is happening, yet they're the ones with the access to the philanthropists, access to the funding streams, right? And it takes money to make money. It takes a background in the nonprofit industrial complex to get big contracts over years. And so that's what they do. And then neoliberalism, right? You can't have those nonprofits without city government officials willing to contract with them. And so it's like this cycle where they, and their relationship with the media allows them to dictate the narrative. And so they claim that they're helping, they spend millions of dollars on helping, but those millions of dollars just goes and lines the pocket of a bunch of people who work for these organizations without really moving the needle at all. I think I'll stop there in interest of time.
Thanks, James. I think we have Chaz up next.
Yeah, I really wanted James to keep going. He was going down a very interesting rabbit hole. I think for me, a reflection, at least, was I think I saw around the country last summer, as it seemed, every state had some form of action and some form of organizing. It feels and it felt like, I'm not quite sure where that lands yet, that we as people wanted to struggle together. And I don't know how authentic some of that is or was, but it was something in these moments when I'm seeing people all around the country come up and come out and stand up for something, stand up for Black people in some form or fashion. But I also see and feel and saw people thinking that if we just fix the police situation, then we'll be good. For the people that watch Euphoria, whether you love that show or not, they did this special episode with Zendaya, and I can't think of that cool black man. But anyway, they're sitting in a diner, and he's reflecting on, he's going into a Nike store, and they have like Black Lives Matter, and he's, for a brief moment, he feels seen, right? Like, man, Nike cares about me. But then, he goes to purchase a shoe, and it's the same amount, right? It's still at this price point that's unfair to Black people that have been left out of economic opportunities, since millennia. So, it kind of in line with what I believe James was saying was, I'm seeing the Bumbles, the Googles, the NFL give to these social justice causes. And all this money is going to like Urban League and NAACP and, reform with Van Jones, which is fine and dandy, but it's still, it kind of went over the people that we need to center and listen to that are doing this work. And then I also see people like we always do, and I call it the 9/11 effect. I remember being in middle school at that time and singing that Proud to Be an American song. And it felt like for, 6 months to a year, the country was all kumbaya. And then we went back very quickly to who we are as a society in this particular region. And I'm seeing people not understanding that you can't fight state violence and white supremacy and racism if you internalize this, right? We still see Black male organizers treat and objectify women and not speak up and stand up for trans Black folks, right? Saying that Black Lives Matter, but with asterisks, right? We're seeing white brothers and sisters with their right fist up saying Black Lives Matter, but behind their back with their left arm that holding on to white privilege, for dear life. We're still seeing people saying eat the rich, but they're still doing everything themselves to emulate these ideals of millionaire and billionaires, right? So I think what I'm trying to say in a very long about way is like, I'm seeing this this friction that's coming with what I believe is this transformational, almost reconstruction period in this country again, to where people are realizing now that some of this shit you can't do both of, right? You cannot be leading the Black Lives Matter march if you do not stand up for Black trans queer folk, right? You cannot be leading and you cannot be a leader within this movement, and you cannot truly be a representative of the community if you're not centering the people that are most infected by these policies and all this shit, right? You cannot say you get it if you're only quoting the Malcolms and the Martins and you forget about the Bell Hooks and Audre Lordes, right? If you're not doing your work, like I tell people all the time, like a lot of us want to create like these Wakandas, and that's a beautiful thing when you think of the aesthetics. But if we don't do the work and we bring in the white supremacy and the internalized racism into the Wakanda, then it's just going to be a Black ass America, right? As we know it. So I'm seeing that friction, and I'm thankful for it, because I think once we process and deal with that, we will begin to see a new level of collective struggle that I think is needed for all of us to get the liberation that we need and deserve in this lifetime. And I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Chaz. So before we turn to Didi, I have to share the continuing legal education code for the people who signed up for CLE credit. It's Chair 7, so CHAIR, and then the number 7. Chair 7 is the CLE code. Okay, Didi.
Yes, thank you. Want to give a little bit of a breath for the interpreters and translators. So I want to plus to the things that like Truth and James and Chaz already spoke to, and want to add some of the kind of reflections and lessons that I've learned throughout the 5 years I've been working with Durham Beyond Policing. I think the coalition is the most important is the most important body. It's it's the thing that needs to be taken care of the most in this work, because we already have different views that we're coming in with around police, around policing, around people. And so taking the care of the health of the coalition, it has felt like one of the most important lessons I've learned, and really like massaging the different theories of change that folks come in with when joining these kinds of campaigns. What I mean by that is, our campaign is called Durham Beyond Policing. And so sometimes we have organizers that'll come in, that are more passionate about the beyond policing part, that are more passionate about building those different systems, about building the alternatives, about building the different numbers that people can call to get assistance and finding the resources. And sometimes that theory of change can clash with the pushes that we can make around our city council, around our elected officials, and staying like on their asses in terms of like talking about a Durham Beyond Policing. One thing that happened with Durham Beyond Policing, we launched in the beginning of 2016, and we had huge city council and mayoral races in 2017 that happened in the city. And we had pushed on them so hard, so long, and had put out so many results of our different surveys and people's budgets, that by the time we got to the election season for our local races, every single panel that was about policing was asking people directly, do you believe in a Durham Beyond Policing? If so, how? Right? And so that pushed the narrative of, and the imagination of how are people imagining a Durham Beyond Policing. And sometimes the way that we get to those places differ. So really like want to just hone in on like the lesson of really massaging the different theories of change that will inherently come with organizers and different partnerships and other organizations that really want to build a Durham Beyond Policing. And not to say that we can accomplish everything, but for us to get really, really clear about what we want to achieve in a particular amount of time and how we want to do it. I think the other thing is like really keeping the foot on the necks of the elected official in every way you can think of. One thing that happened that Durham Beyond Policing has a number of organizations that are part of it, but a group of folks that has been part of the campaign is Jewish Voices for Peace. And one thing in Durham that they were pushing for was for an official statement to come out of our city council, declaring that they would never have our police department partner with the Israeli defense firms and working with the folks that are contributing to the violence and contributing to what's happening, the colonization that's happening in Palestine. And that work of solidarity of when they would push for people to show up to the city council meetings to really speak on this, we were also pushing our folks within the entire Durham Beyond Policing orbit to also show up to the city council meetings and draw the connections, right, between the police and what's happening to our folks over in Palestine, and building that solidarity in practice. And the last kind of reflection that I have is like everything is practice, everything is practice, everything is practice. Like how we build our structures, how we do direct actions, the language that we develop, the way that we train our folks, it's all practice. And my vision of liberation and freedom is permanently organized communities, right? So what would that take? That takes the massaging of people's theory of changes of how things need to shift. It also takes practicing and being in solidarity with the many different organizations that are fighting for what we're fighting for. And it also means that we're consistently practicing what we want to build. We're practicing holding people accountable in ways that aren't carceral, in ways that aren't punishment, but are ways that are actually holding accountability. And how can we make sure, I'm going too fast. Okay. How can we make sure that we are, that we're really invested in that practice for the long haul? I think people love accountability but hate their own. And so I think we have to like continue to be in deep reflection about the world that we're trying to build and who we want to build it with. The whole point of organizing is that we're doing something that we can't do alone. We're changing something that we can't change alone. And that has to be embedded in how we understand the communities that go beyond policing.
Thanks, Dee Dee. I wish you could all see like the 4 pages of notes I've taken on all the brilliant insights you've all shared. Okay, Antonine.
Cool. You know, the thing about going first is that you don't get to say how brilliant everybody is. So just echoing everybody on being in such a dope ass room of Black organizers. And you know, I want to name that the first time that I heard about abolition, I was mad confused because I learned that that already happened. So like, you know, we're in this conversation about abolition, and yet a lot of the work hasn't really been done to talk about what that means, what that looks like in practice, right? Like if I leave my friend's house, and you know, back when we used to go to people's houses and they ask me to text them when I get home, like that's safety, right? Like that's safety outside of policing, that's community safety. And so we want to name that abolition as something that is not foreign to people. It's just that it's, you know, it's a concept that is currently being used to scare people. And I want to actually shout out a BMC member, Zakia Henderson-Brown, who's on the call right now, because we worked to start this anti-street harassment collective in 2013 in Brooklyn called No Disrespect. And the idea was really that we needed to solve this issue without police. And I have to say, I was, you know, an organizer bringing folks together to solve this issue. And we all sat down to have the first meeting, and Zakia was like, okay, so we're not gonna call cops. And I was like, what? And she was like, well, the cops create more problems when we call them. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Right. And that is how our work in No Disrespect went. We would go out and we would talk to people about patriarchy, and they had more issues with patriarchy than they did with policing. They weren't like, oh, actually, you should be calling the cops for this, right? They completely understood. And I think that gets at, when we talk about challenges, I think that there are things that people inherently understand, like police do not equal safety. And then there are things that we need to actually make clear and plain. And it's so great to hear about the work that was happening in Durham, because it feels like you all were really good at breaking down the budget into ways that people could understand. And that is one of our big challenges, right? Like that we are talking about municipal budgets. Not only is it complicated for the people that we're trying to organize to understand, most of us don't know anything about running budget campaigns. Like our strategies for Black liberation have really been centered around legislation and around electing Black elected officials, who in particular around the uprisings in June, which like similar to Oakland, our fiscal day, the end of our fiscal year is June 30th. So a lot of municipalities were in this conversation. I apologize, I'm gonna slow down. Not that I've gotten the signal, but I realize I'm going really fast. But that what was particularly hard about this past June was that we had local Black elected officials who, instead of like realizing or actually being honest about how their constituents are affected, were really pointing the fingers or saying like, well, these people, they're not Black, they're not in my district, they don't know anything, right? Like, so a big challenge is that we're being discredited by the folks who claim to represent us, right? So that's one piece. And then, you know, another big challenge, or not even a challenge, actually, it's a challenge that I would say is a victory, is that, you know, a lot of folks got hip to this issue the last week of May, the first week of June, when the Movement for Black Lives put out this national call, like, we defunding, right? Like, it's time. And, you know, we were kind of thrust in New York City, we were thrust into this conversation. And it is, you know, the campaigns that we were building started around mental health, right? Started around getting police around mental health. Really, I think the momentum built here in New York City around the murder of Saheed Vaxel in April 2018, who was murdered in Crown Heights and was having a mental health crisis. And he was killed by police within 10 seconds of them exiting their vehicles, right? In broad daylight, of course. And so we had been doing this work and building and thinking about doing the policy work of how do we remove police from mental health encounters, and building for this kind of defund campaign for this year, right? For the 2022 budget conversation. So for us to get as far as we did in the 2021 budget is nothing short of a miracle. And, you know, one of the ways that we know that we were victorious is that by the end of the month, by the time the budget was passed, we had the city council speaker and we had the mayor using our talking points, right? Saying that they've defunded. You know, our numbers have shown that the NYPD budget has actually increased over the last year. And the only city agency that's been defunded at $1 billion in New York City is the Department of Education. And so, you know, I mean, it's a hard victory, right? To say that we've won because they're trying to act like they're us, but that's what it is. And that speaks to our power to shift the context, but it doesn't speak to our power to actually be able to move, right? So one of our challenges right now is building that power. And, you know, I wanna give a nod to James in terms of naming white supremacy here, because, you know, I think solidarity building, as Dee was saying about like the coalition strength of building power is so deeply important. And we're gonna disagree. That is what happens, right? We talk about the left is a lot of folks. We are going to disagree. The question is, what do we agree on? Where are we aligned? Where are we saying, okay, this is our turn to get together and take some clear shots at white supremacy, because that is who we're fighting, and we're not fighting each other, right? And so that, I mean, those are a bunch of challenges, some victories, and also just remembering, you know, everybody right now is suddenly an abolitionist. Everybody's got abolitionist in their Twitter bio. Everyone's excited about abolition. But like, have you struggled with the concept of abolition, right? Have you experienced harm where you're like, yo, I'm gonna have to beat that person up, right? Like, have you seen your family members experience harm and really come to that place? Because we are talking about unlearning a lifetime of like the carceral system, right? Like a lifetime of being programmed to think that that accountability has to be punishment, right? So when we are talking about abolition, we are doing our work. I'm doing my work every day. I get tested around like how much I actually want to live in this different world. And it has to go beyond putting this shit in your Twitter box.
Thanks for that, Antonine. So the audience won't be surprised that we were hoping to have a long conversation after this, and alas, we're pretty much out of time. We have, but hopefully you all feel, the audience, you all feel very happy and nourished and learned a lot. I mean, I certainly did. So we just have a couple minutes left, like literally, and I'm just wondering if, and we have some questions from the Q&A about, like, for example, how disability justice fits into abolitionist work, how to work with unions, what are structures for community storytelling and political education. I know we had wanted to talk about if anyone had good or bad experiences working with lawyers. We don't have time to get into all of that, but I just wanted to invite anyone on the panel to kind of share any reflections based on hearing everyone else, or any other thoughts you kind of had in listening to all the brilliance and experience that came out of everyone else on the panel.
I'm a lawyer. Sorry to all of you who are also lawyers, what mistakes we have made. I want to really quickly, I feel like litigation right now as a shield to protect, for instance, protesters or class actions in supportive movements makes sense, but I don't know how much room there is for impact litigation at the forefront of our movements. Things move so slowly when we're talking about litigating, right? We need to be nimble and we need to be agile. So I found that my law degree has been best service to the movement in terms of providing technical expertise when it comes to legislation at the local or state level, and then just taking the language that has been not accessible to our people and translating it and giving people the tools to translate it so the city can't hide behind policies that sound obscure and hide what they're really doing.
Yes, I just want to say real quick with the Black Strategies table that I'm part of here in the city, we had a crunchy conversation today, like around dealing with the charter and language that we want specifically in there. And, you know, and there's a lot of different voices that come together that advise this table and are also leadership in their own right. And there was a discrepancy about just a couple of words, right? And legally, it was that we needed to make sure that even though it didn't reflect fully what we really want to say, we had to say what needs to be said illegally. And so it was, you know, just to connect that to what James just said, like with the question of how does law assist us? Like, is law a tool? You know, for me, it definitely should be a tool, and especially around technical assistance and our language that needs to be properly placed within documents, especially when we're approaching a big gigantic system that's built on a lot of words sometimes that we know nothing the power of, and understanding how to use words in the most powerful way, to me, is always beneficial for our movement. So I just wanted to just tack, you know.
All right, so thank you so much to James and Truth for closing us out, and to all of our panelists for all of the amazing work that you do, and the fact that you were willing to make time to share your experience and your brilliance, your learning with this audience. And thanks to the NYU Journal of Law and Social Change for bringing us together. It's been a deep pleasure and honor to moderate this panel. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everybody. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you to our panelists and our moderators for your time, for being here, for providing insight into your campaigns and reflections on the work to date and the path forward. Today's panels were so energizing and inspiring, and I'm just so grateful to have been here to witness it. And I don't think I'm just speaking for myself with that. So this concludes our colloquium. Thank you again to all of our panelists and moderators for sharing their work, reflections, insights, and calls to action with us over the past 2 days. Thanks also to our live captioners and our interpreters for helping us to make this event more accessible. Thanks to our partners at NYU Black Allied Law Students Association and the Latinx Law Students Association, as well as the Student Bar Association and our 40+ student group co-sponsors, and our many student volunteers that helped to make this event possible. A recording and transcript for both sessions will be available shortly at socialchangenyu.com. We'll put a link in the comments, along with a companion Defund to Abolish digital issue featuring works from some of our panelists, which will come out this spring. We'll email you when all of that is posted. So we hope that everyone leaves this event with new knowledge, new perspectives, new or renewed inspiration, and new tools to fight for racial justice and police abolition. We hope that the Take Action resource, which you should have received in an email, and crowdsourced from our panelists, supports you in translating the ideas and examples shared over the past couple days into action in your own work and communities. Thanks, and have a good night.